Someone who calls themselves an environmental educator will wear many different hats: boat captain, tour guide, educator, and many other things. In this episode, I talk with Shannon, who is an environmental educator who specializes in guiding whale watching and hiking tours. There's whale snot, bubble nets, porcupines in trees, and bald eagles, all next to talk of school and why environmental education is important. Do you mind sharing a little bit about yourself, how old you are, where you're from, where you went to school, and how long you've been in your current position?
So my name is Shannon Easterly. I'm originally from Georgia, once upon a time in a different life, and I went to the University of Georgia. After college, I moved out to Hawaii to do humpback whale research. And after a little while down there, I made my way up to Alaska, where I currently work as an environmental educator, running whale watching tours and hiking tours. Um, I didn't mean to move to Alaska. I meant to come up here for one summer, and now I live here year round. It's been about 5 years now. No regrets. I love it so much.
I'm very glad you have no regrets. It sounds like a beautiful place to live.
It's incredible. Rainy. It is a rainforest, but other than that, pretty great.
It's a cold rainforest, right?
It is. It's a temperate rainforest. It's actually the world's largest intact temperate rainforest.
Oh, that's very cool. So, for my not sciency person, what does temperate mean? Temperate rainforest.
So, a temperate rainforest is going to be as opposed to a tropical rainforest. So, a tropical rainforest is going to be in, as the name implies, is in the tropics. So, it tends to be closer to the equator. So, if you go down to Central or South America, those are going to be your tropical rainforests. Or over in Africa, there are a lot of tropical rainforests as well. There are a couple of temperate rainforests, which are just rainforests that have a cooler average temperature. So, for example, here in Juneau, our average summer temperatures tend to be in the 60s and 70s Fahrenheit, but we get just as much rain as a tropical rainforest, sometimes more.
Oh my goodness, that's a lot of rain.
It is a lot of rain. Yeah.
So, what does the temperature range look like there in Juneau?
So in the winter time, we average right around freezing. Um, Getting warmer, as the climate continues to change and continues to warm, but we still average right around freezing. So we go back and forth between snow and rain in the winter time. And in the summer, like I said, our temperature average tends to be in the 60s to 70s. We also have summer days in the middle of July that are going to be in the 50s. Juneau's record temperature ever, I believe, is 90 degrees Fahrenheit, is the hottest it's ever been here. So it doesn't get too hot, it doesn't get too cold. That's another indicator of that temperate climate.
Yeah, it stays pretty consistent, it sounds like. Here in Minnesota, we can get literally in the 30s one week and 110 6 days later. So,
Yeah, if you go up into the interior of Alaska, it's like that. So if you go up to Fairbanks, it's, negative 50 in the winter and over 100 in the summer. But
oh my
luckily, we're
goodness.
really tempered by being close to the ocean. We get that sort of tempering effect that an ocean provides, which is really nice. It's nice having a little bit more consistency.
That is really nice. So, tell me what you call your job title and a little bit about how you would describe what you do on a daily basis.
So I am a naturalist, and what that means is that I take people out on whale watching or hiking guided tours. And my job is not only to keep them safe and show them things, but also to talk about what we're seeing. If we see a humpback whale slap its pectoral flipper, those are a whale's big long arms. If we see a pectoral flipper slapping against the surface of the water, we're not going to just admire and ooh and ah. We're going to talk about what that is and why the whale might be doing that, at least our best guess of why the whale might be doing that. And then when we go out into the forest, um, I show people different kinds of plants and mushrooms. And instead of just saying, oh, well, this is a Sitka spruce, we talk about the environment. We talk about the glacial succession is a big one for us. So, what comes in what order after a glacier leaves? Why is it that eventually an old growth rainforest in southeast Alaska is going to be dominated by hemlock trees? Why hemlock trees instead of spruce trees? So, a lot of what we do is interpreting the why to people and making sure that people make a real deep connection to the environment in Southeast Alaska instead of just taking pretty pictures to show in a slideshow when they go back home for their friends and family.
So it's more than a tourist attraction.
Exactly. That's our goal is to be more than a tourist attraction. It's for people to leave with an understanding and a connection that they didn't have before they came up here. That's what makes the difference between, say, a naturalist and just a tour guide. Not that there's anything wrong with a tour guide, but it's a different kind of experience depending on what you want when you go out on a trip.
How did you end up in this specific position? It sounds like you moved here from, or moved up to Alaska from Hawaii.
I did with an interim in New Zealand. I spent about 6 months in New Zealand in between. So, what really brought me up here was a desire to get more into science communication instead of just research. So, my background is in cetacean, that's whales and dolphins and porpoises. My background is in cetacean research. But ultimately, I think it's really important to be able to communicate that science to people. Um, so I consider myself a science communicator and an environmental educator. And that's really what I love about my job and what brought me up here was being able to take that background in science and in research and turn that into being able to inspire people to care about the environment, to teach people about climate change so that people have a better understanding when you're watching the news or something like that. So that's really what brought me into this field was a desire to get into science communication and environmental education.
And when did that kind of start? So the whole goal of this podcast is to bring to light some of the different careers that a person could go into. And
Hmm.
one thing that I've always been a little bit fascinated with is when people really start to think that, oh, this is something I can do. Is it someone you saw on TV, something like that? So where did that come in for you?
So for me specifically, I found out about these jobs from other folks working down in Hawaii. So there's a big whale tourism culture down in Hawaii. So our humpback whales here in Southeast Alaska travel down to Hawaii in the winter time in order to breed and give birth. So there's actually a lot of back and forth in naturalists between Southeast Alaska in the summer and then down to Hawaii in the winter working with the same whales in similar positions, just following the whales back and forth. And I met some of those people while I was down in Hawaii and realized that I thought it would be really, really cool to do what they do. So I moved up here. Um, and I worked for a different company than I work for now. I found my perfect fit. And yeah, mostly it came from I went on some trips and I really enjoyed getting to listen to naturalists be able to describe what it was that people were seeing when we were out on tour. Um, and it was really cool to be able to see that spark hit people's eyes and stuff like that when they would realize that when you go whale watching, you're not just whale watching. You can really make a connection to the environment and better understand the world around you. And I thought that was really cool.
That is really cool. They get to learn a little bit about what you do and what your whole purpose is.
Exactly.
Very cool. So when did you, or where did you go to school and what kind of degree did you get for this?
So I went to the University of Georgia and I have a degree in biology. I focused a lot of my class choices on things like conservation biology and ecology and animal behavior. And when I was in college, I actually worked with a bottlenose dolphin research group off the coast of Georgia called the Georgia Dolphin Ecology Project. Sorry, the Georgia Dolphin Ecology Program. And that was really how I got into marine mammal research. And then I applied for a couple of internships at the end of my degree. I actually had an internship interview the night before my very last final, and picked an internship in Hawaii, and I moved out there, and then they actually hired me afterwards. And that kind of just jump started that whole career. I got very fortunate that they hired me afterwards. Um, it can be kind of hard to break into the marine mammal field. As you can imagine, a lot of people really enjoy working with marine mammals. Everybody wants to work with dolphins, just like everybody wants to work with sharks. They can be pretty competitive. So it's a really great way to be able to kind of break into that field to start to do environmental education and teach people about those things too.
Yeah, so for someone who would be possibly looking at this as a future career aspect, what kind of things could they do possibly before college, during college, that might help them break into that competitive field?
I think that one of the most important things that you can do, if you have the means to do so, is maybe volunteer at a local nature center, even if it's just one day a week. It teaches you those public speaking skills that are really essential for being an environmental educator. So for me, I wasn't a great public speaker until I started doing this, and the first couple of months of my job would have been much easier if I had had any other public speaking. Yeah, and as far as in college is concerned, I think that for a lot of people, a degree in science is a really good start, a really good jumping off point. A lot of my coworkers have degrees in biology or marine biology or even chemistry. I worked with someone who had a degree in geology, and he ran amazing whale watching tours. I think one of the big things is having that background in scientific understanding, because once you understand how science works, then you can better interpret almost any kind of science, because a lot of sciences go off of the same principles, off of the scientific method, as it were. So you can better understand the research that you're reading to be able to interpret it to the public. So I think that having a background in science is a really important part of being able to be an environmental educator of any kind. Um, and then, like I said, adding on some sort of experience doing public speaking, whether that's a debate club or even taking a class in public speaking, or if you're doing a group project in college and someone has to present, volunteer to present, even if it's uncomfortable. It does take a while to get used to public speaking. So I think that being able to have those skills will make you more successful in applying for environmental education jobs or applying for jobs as a naturalist. Being able to demonstrate, I already know how to do that. I know how science works so that I can better interpret it to people, will make you more successful as an environmental educator.
Is that something that they're looking for when they try to hire people too, or is it more of a streamlined process?
It's definitely something that people look for when they're trying to hire people. So, a lot of the times, interview questions for environmental education jobs, at least in my experience, um, the positions in my company, for example, as a science naturalist, do tend to require you to have had a 4-year degree in some sort of science field. And then most companies are willing to work with you and train you on specifics to the environment that you're working in, and also practice working as a naturalist and an interpreter, because it is a little bit different than your standard public speaking. But it can really give you a leg up to have that background in public speaking experience or even in customer service experience. That can be really helpful as well. Having customer service experience will make you a lot better at working with customers. So, for a lot of folks, that could just be a background working in retail or in the restaurant industry as well. It can actually be really helpful, especially if you're dealing with somebody who wants to argue with you about climate change or something like that. It can help you keep your cool when somebody's trying to berate you about how the globe is not warming or something like that. So there are a lot of different ways that you can get into environmental education. I do think that having a 4-year degree makes a really big difference, especially if you want to be an interpreter at a national park or something like that.
Do you run into people who want to argue with you a lot?
I do run into people who want to argue with me. Fortunately, I'm actually running into fewer and fewer as time goes on. The main point of contention does tend to be climate change. So we take people on tours where we get to see glaciers. We see at least one glacier on almost every trip that we run, and on some trips, it might be as many as four different glaciers. So we talk about climate change a lot, and I used to have more people be combative about it than I do now. I don't know if that's a change in how I interpret about climate change or a change in the general acceptance of climate change as a thing that exists. But I do occasionally get people be combative with me about it. Usually, um, the most important thing is to just kind of meet them where they are. Say, you know what, that thing you just said, you're right, that is true. But also, this other thing is also true. It can be kind of difficult the first time that somebody wants to fight with you about climate change. But it is happening less and less. I don't know if that's just me or if it's a public change in perception on climate change in general. It does happen. I wouldn't say it's common, though.
So, do you have a typical day in your life, in your job, or is it more of a every day is a little bit different? Sometimes things change week to week.
I would say that everything is a little bit different, or sorry, every day is a little bit different. Um, so some days I might be running a hiking trip, some days I might be running a whale watching trip, other days I might be running a trip that's a combination of those two, sort of like a short walk and then some time out on the water as well. Other days I'm just driving a bus for other naturalists. So every day is a little bit different. And then, of course, even if my schedule was the same day to day or week to week, every day would be different because the wildlife is always different and the environment is always changing. So my tour in September is vastly different from my tour in May because what's out in the forest is completely different. The presence of bears is more common in September as compared to in May, and the whale behavior might be different as well. So even if the schedule were the same day to day, every day is completely different and new and exciting. And that's one of my favorite things about my job. Not only do I get to spend a lot of time outside and teaching people about the environment, but it's also new and different for me every single day, too.
I love how passionate you are about this.
I love it. I love what I do, honestly. I think it's one of the coolest things in the world. I sometimes can't believe that I get paid to teach people about whales. I have been paid to get covered in whale snot. Don't recommend that part, but it happened. I have cried on tour before. I had one time where our humpback whales in Southeast Alaska do this behavior called bubble net feeding, where they basically all a group of whales will work together to herd a bunch of herring into a ball, and then they dive down underneath it, and one of the whales makes a ring of bubbles around all of the fish, and then all of the other whales come up through the center with their mouths wide open and just grab a huge mouthful of herring. But before they do that, there's one whale who's kind of the ringleader. She's kind of in charge, orchestrating this incredibly complex play. And she makes a sound to coordinate it. And then right before they're about to come up, all of the whales join in on the sound. And I remember one particular time, my first year up here, I heard the sound through the hull of our boat and I just burst into tears. Just immediately burst into tears. And all of the older women on my tour came up to me and they were like, "Oh, are you okay?" And I was like, "I'm fine. This is just the most beautiful thing I've ever had happen to me in my entire life."
I love it. That sounds fantastic.
It is absolutely worthwhile.
Oh, that's amazing. That's another reason I want to do this podcast is because there are people who don't get to experience that. So if they could and just have a moment where they're like, I can't believe I get paid to do this, that's my hope.
That sounds like a great idea. I love it.
So when you do a tour, is it like a couple hours? Are there any that are more like a day long? Are you by yourself leading it? How many people are you normally presenting to?
Great question. So for the company that I work for, we focus primarily on smaller groups. Our tours max out at 20 people. And personally, I think that that's a really good group size. When you get bigger than that, you're not able to make as many connections with people. Um, so we tend to have groups of about 20, and most of our tours are 3 to 5 hours long. The vast majority of tourists to Juneau are cruise ship passengers. So most of our guests don't have an entire 12-hour day to go on a long 10-hour boat trip or something like that. We're on the hour for a little, or on the water for a little over 2 hours, maybe 2.5 hours. So it's not a big long time. But one of my favorite things about what I do is being able to greet people and they get on my bus and they are mine for the entire trip. So that means that I can really show them Southeast Alaska. We can talk about indigenous Alaskan culture. We can talk about all like the natural history of this place as well as the human history of this place for 3 hours. And then some of the tours are up to 5 hours. So they're pretty short, all things considered. These aren't multi day trips or anything like that, but it's long enough to really get to know people. I do my best to learn everyone's name. I can usually get up to 15 names at this point, but beyond that, it gets a little bit tough.
That's what I would have the hardest time with. I am awful at names.
Me too. And some days I don't get any names, but every now and then I'm really on point, and by the end of the tour, I know everyone's name. I think the most important part is to make sure you know every kid's name. If there are kids on tour, you should know all of their names in the first like 15 minutes because it makes it so much easier to connect with kids if you can call them by name.
Yeah. Do you feel like you've ever really reached out to someone and they just took every word you were saying like it was the greatest thing they've ever heard?
That that's like the best experience you can have as an environmental educator is when you somehow manage to hook somebody in so much that they're completely engaged the entire time. And it is not an everyday thing that someone is completely engaged the whole time. But it has happened. I have gotten emails from guests after a tour asking for pictures that I took that day or sending me the pictures that they took that day just because they want to share them with me. I had an ongoing email exchange for a little while with a lovely 12-year-old girl who wanted to become a marine biologist after our tour. So we emailed back and forth, obviously, with her mom sitting in for a couple of months. Um, and then eventually just kind of fell out of contact. But yeah, for a couple of months, we were talking about what it takes to be a marine biologist and what maybe she wanted to focus on in high school if she really wanted to pursue being a marine biologist and things like that. So every now and then you get someone that you can tell you really affected them and really made them think about the environment around them instead of just kind of looking around and absorbing it. And while the crying over whales and seeing bears and stuff like that is amazing, I think the best part of my job is that moment when you think you've really gotten through to somebody and they're going to take what they learned on your tour and they're going to take it home and make their world a better place as a result. That is the best part of my job.
That is an amazing part and probably the reason that you do what you do.
Exactly. Yeah. If I want to just see whales, I could get back into research, which I'd like to do at some point. But even when I get back into research, I'm going to take what I learned as an environmental educator. I'd like to go to grad school at some point, but I can take what I've learned as an environmental educator to be able to talk about the research that I do in a way that the public and other people will really understand. Because what's the point of doing research if no one can understand what you did? So I think that's the most important part of being an environmental educator is being able to make that connection with people, so that they can understand the science and the world around them. It's the most important part, and it's also the most exciting part.
Well, and that's what makes you good at your job too, is your passion for it. So, jumping back to our 12-year-old friend, you mentioned that you would talk to her about things that she might want to focus on in high school. And we've already talked a little bit about trying to do some volunteering and things like that. But are there classes and specific things to focus on for, say, a biology major that maybe you wish you did or wish you knew about before?
So for me, when I was in high school, I took AP biology, and taking AP classes, I think I wish I'd taken more AP classes because then I actually could have gotten more college credits while I was in high school, which would have opened up more time in college to take more specific classes. So I was able to take things like ecology and conservation biology and animal behavior. Um, but if I had had more time, there are other things I maybe could have taken as well that really could have enhanced just me and my learning in college, really making the best out of that time. Um, I don't think that taking AP classes is necessary, but it certainly helps to make sure that you've got the opportunity to take all of the classes you actually want to take once you get to college, to be able to actually focus in on those interesting things. And those small classes tend to be where you find potential mentors and things like that a lot more, as well as compared to your 300-person intro to chemistry class. So if I had, for example, taken AP chemistry, maybe I would have gotten credit for that and then been able to take something else instead, maybe a mammalogy course or something like that. Um, so I don't think that it was necessary. I don't regret the choices that I made. It worked out perfectly for me. But if I could go back and do it again, knowing what I know now, I would have tried to take more AP classes in high school if they were available to me, just so that I could get some of those low cost college credits and have more opportunities for more specialized classes as an undergraduate in college.
So, one of my favorite questions to ask people is how they chose the college that they ended up going to. So, how did your decision come about, and if it led to anything that is important to you?
So for me, part of my college decision did come down to a scholarship that you can get in Georgia called the Hope Scholarship. The scholarship is a little bit different now than it was when I went to college, but it's still basic. It's funded by Georgia's lottery, and it basically affords students who keep high grades an opportunity to get most or even all of your college tuition covered. So that actually made a big impact on my decision for where to go. At the time when I started college, I didn't realize that research was where I wanted to really end up. I kind of had aspirations to be an animal trainer at the time. And that just kind of shifted over the course of college, but it worked out really well for me because I discovered that dolphin research program that I ended up working with and occasionally still work with when I pop back home. When I'm back home, every now and then I end up in South Georgia doing a little bit of dolphin research just because of that old connection. And it really worked out better than I think you would think when you look at it on paper. If I were applying for undergrad now, again, knowing what I know, I think the most important thing that I would look at is really the professors and what they study, because you have the opportunity to get in and help do research as an undergraduate if you can find a professor that does research in an area that you're interested in, and you might actually be able to get some really great research experience as an undergraduate, um, or maybe even intern for college credit as an undergraduate, if you can find someone who would be willing to sponsor you to do that, basically sign off on a credit if you do that. So I think that if I was applying again now, the most important thing I would look at is, are there any professors that are doing research in areas that I find particularly interesting? And then try to connect with them as soon as possible once you get into school. Take classes with them and see if they have any need for undergrad help in their labs. A lot of them do. So I think that's what I would do a little bit differently. That's not how I ended up where I was. I think I got kind of lucky. The University of Georgia is a great school, not particularly known for its marine biology, though. So it's a little bit landlocked. Although the University of Georgia now does own um, an annex on the coast, but I think they had just bought that about halfway through my undergrad. So that was not part of my decision.
Yeah, I don't know of any colleges in Minnesota that have any coastal annexes.
No, maybe not. Maybe not.
But, oh, that's very cool. I'm glad that you did end up at a place that worked out very well for you.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing for a lot of people, even if you did go to, say, the University of Minnesota, you can get a really good background in just biology and that kind of research, and then go on from there to end up doing something with marine science, because so much of what you learn in college isn't the specific information. It's how to learn and how to interpret research, how to do research. That's the important takeaway from college more so than the specific things. So I think that the most important thing is go learn how to learn, and then you can take that and go basically anywhere.
Oh, I like that. I like that a lot. What is the most challenging thing about your career anywhere along the line?
I think that the most challenging thing about my current career is seasonality. So the vast majority of my work takes place in 6 months out of the year, between April and maybe October. Um, so I actually work in a similar but slightly different field in the winter time. I work as a protected species observer. Um, Basically, I work monitoring marine mammals during in-water construction. So they're related things, but a little bit different. They both involve marine mammals, but they're a little bit different. I think that that is the most challenging thing for me where I work. There are some environmental education jobs that are year round, say working for a state park. A lot of those are year round, or a lot of national park positions are year round, or even the forestry department. But my particular position is not year round. So that can be kind of challenging. It does require me to have a different job in the winter time. Um, I think that's probably the most challenging logistically. And then the most challenging part of being on my job is counting people constantly. I'm constantly counting my guests to make sure I haven't lost anyone in the woods. So
That probably wouldn't be very good.
no, it would not be good. I've never lost anyone, knock on wood. But I have misplaced someone for about 5 minutes before. We entered into an area where we're finishing up a trip. We're about to get back on our bus, and there were some other people around because they were watching a bear. And I got everyone on the bus, and then I realized I did not have everyone on the bus. I was missing someone, and they had disappeared into the crowd to continue watching the bear, even though we had to head out to our whale watch. So I found them very quickly. But it is a very nerve wracking couple of minutes. You go, oh no, how am I going to get them back?
How am I going to explain this?
Exactly. Yeah.
So what is the best career decision that you've ever made?
Moving to Alaska by far. I mean, that's what got me into this particular career in general, um, was that move. But then on top of that, there are just so many opportunities here. And I love living here too. It's made a huge difference in my life just moving up to Alaska. So I think that being willing to relocate for the right thing is probably the best career decision I've ever made. Just saying, you know what, I am not entirely attached to where I live. I'm more attached to what I want to do. And that worked out really, really well for me.
Was your transition from Hawaii to Alaska difficult?
It was kind of difficult. They are very different climatically. So that part was a little bit difficult. So in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. In part because having lived down in Hawaii and known a lot of people that do a back and forth between Hawaii and Alaska, when I moved up here, I already knew some people, and that helped a lot. Um, they're both kind of small communities. So I lived on the island of Maui, and then moving up here to Juneau. Uh, Obviously, Maui is an island. Juneau is effectively an island. So even though we're on mainland North America, we're in mainland Alaska, there are no roads in or out of Juneau. There are mountains and glaciers in the way. So you could theoretically build a road, but it's uh, cost prohibitive. Um, so in a lot of ways, they have some cultural similarities just by both being smaller communities that are fairly isolated. Um, I think that if I had moved to Juneau from, say, downtown Atlanta or something like that, it might have been a little bit more difficult because it is a little bit, uh, I don't want to say a little bit slower paced because it's not really slower paced, but it feels slower paced in a way than like a big city does. We don't have any billboards. The highest speed limit is 55 miles an hour. Um, so, in a lot of ways, it's got some similarities to being down in Hawaii. And I think that's why so many people are able to seamlessly make that transition back and forth between Hawaii and Alaska. It was not as difficult as it might sound on the surface. If I had moved maybe to Anchorage, it would be different. But moving to Juneau, it wasn't too hard.
Okay. Have you ever seen any animals you didn't expect or other like nature things that were not expected?
When I moved up here, I did not realize how many porcupines there are. There are lots of porcupines, and porcupines aren't what people think they are. I mean, they're spiky, and that's all most people think about when they think about porcupines. But people don't realize that porcupines spend most of their lives in trees. They're pretty good climbers. They're also incredibly cute. They cannot shoot their quills. That's a myth. Um, you would be surprised how often dogs get into porcupines and don't learn their lesson. They just keep doing it over and over and over again. I think that realizing how many porcupines there are up here was one of the most surprising things. I expected whales, I expected sea lions and seals and bears, and all of that is here. Um, but there's that and so much more. I had no idea how many bald eagles there were in Southeast Alaska. I have seen upwards of 50 eagles in a single day. I see eagles from my desk where I'm sitting now. Um, they're everywhere. So I knew there were eagles up here. I just had no idea how many. I had no idea there were so many porcupines. It's been a real eye-opening experience.
That is so cool. I had no idea porcupines could climb a tree.
Yeah, they climb
So,
trees a lot. You know, it's funny. A couple of years ago, PBS and the BBC worked together to produce a series called Wild Alaska Live. And you can, I think, still find it online. And they were filming out at the Mendenhall Glacier Recreation Area, which is one of the places that we go on some of our tours to take people out to see the glacier and talk about the rainforest and stuff like that. Um, and they had a problem. They ran up against an unexpected issue, which was that porcupines were chewing through their cables. So when they had the cabling, they did this project for months. So they had semi-permanent cables out, and they ended up having to wrap them up with tape and things that they did not anticipate because porcupines would get into it and just chew through the cables.
Oh my gosh.
Who knew?
Not me.
Me either.
I've never seen a porcupine in person. And we see bald eagles probably weekly around
Mhm.
here. But yeah, I mean, we just moved out away from the cities a little bit, so I'm less in the cities, but I still don't see very much nature besides geese. So,
I think that I think that's one of the things that I like about my job the most is being able to show people nature in a way that I hope they can continue to look for nature when they go back home. Especially things like mushrooms and mosses and things that you don't really think about as being important. But most of our soil in Southeast Alaska is decayed moss, at least in areas that were recently covered by glaciers. Moss acts as our soil, and then the trees can grow in it. All of the mushrooms that you see form this vast network of mycorrhiza, which is basically the body of the mushroom, the body of the fungus underground that's absolutely essential to anything else that you see. So many plants that we see are dependent on fungi. And so one of my goals when I take people out is to show them, the grandeur of Alaska. It's a really incredible place, but also talk about how you can take that awe and admiration home to your backyard. Because there is so much more that we don't think about, like urban nature, even how peregrine falcons are doing a good job adapting to human environments and things like that, are things that people don't think about as being nature because it's in a city. But nature doesn't have to be out in the wilderness. It's right there in your backyard if you look for it hard enough. There's nature everywhere.
other than like you just mentioned, possibly working at a national park someday, is there more steps on your ladder that you feel like you could climb?
For me personally, yes. I would like to go back to graduate school. I love what I do, but I'd also like to get back into research as well. So ideally, I'd like to be doing research. We do a little bit of citizen science on our tours. We're monitoring for an invasive crab species. We take photo identification pictures of our humpback whales and things like that. But I'd really like to get back into doing more serious research. But I want to make sure that I always take that environmental education with me and continue to try to do science communication and things like that as well. So for me personally, I'd like to go to graduate school and do more research. Um, but I want to make sure that I never leave behind that environmental education aspect of it. I want to make sure that I take that with me so that I can interpret my research and other people's research and continue to just kind of inspire awe and caring about the environment.
Environmental education is a process that helps individuals, communities, and organizations learn more about the environment and develop skills and understanding about how to address global challenges. It has the power to transform lives and society. It informs and inspires and influences attitudes. Motivating action, environmental education is a key tool in expanding the constituency for the environmental movement and creating healthier and more civically engaged communities. Some places you might find environmental education jobs are nature magnet schools, STEM schools, fish and wildlife, AmeriCorps, national, state, and county parks, zoos, museums, and aquariums. A good resource for looking into learning more about environmental education is Project Learning Tree. And job seekers typically have a bachelor's degree in a science field. If this is a field you feel you may do well in, I strongly encourage you to do some more research, starting at the links in the show notes. Project Learning Tree, alaska.org, bls.gov, and datatopics.wordbank.org. The Environmental Protection Agency is also a great resource, and NAAEE, the North American Association for Environmental Education, has some great information on schools and other volunteer and intern opportunities. Thanks for listening to the Career Chronicles by Jade Grundy. I don't like that. Thanks for listening to the Career Chronicles, and a special thanks to Thanks for listening to the Career Chronicles, and a special thanks to our very special guest, Shannon Easterly, for coming on to talk about her job in environmental education. You can find Shannon on Instagram at easterlywind and on the web at easterlywind.design. You can find the Career Chronicles on Instagram, Facebook, and all major podcast streaming platforms at The Career Chronicles. I'm your host, Jade Grundy, and I'll talk to you next week.